So welcome everyone for our third session of this workshop series. On Wednesday, we focused a bit, we dived deep into the solution. We started thinking about social business modeling, how to structure them in a regenerative way that give back to the planet and to the people living in this planet. So we went really already active. But whenever we start building social businesses, we actually take many more steps back and we talk about problems. So in social business, we love problems. We build businesses to love problems. And what we will see today is how do we apply system thinking, which is one of the future skills we saw last time, to solve these problems. And we're going to make a little bit of an example. I invite you also today to think about your own projects and follow me with your own perspectives as well. And as Wednesday, I just love the interaction that started happening in the room. So anytime you have something to say, comment, ask, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself, talk while I'm talking. So I just love to be interrupted. So feel free to do that all the time. So, and because we said we love problems, I know it's a bit of a negative way to start with, but I want to start at a check-in. Oh my God, wait a moment, the slides are just going on their own. Yes, sorry. The check-in. So what is the problem that you're loving solving right now with your projects? So if you can type it in the chat, or anyone who wants to mic themselves, feel free to do that. So write in the chat, what is the problem that you're loving solving right now? Let me open the chat. I'm gonna also write. So, what problems we see? Lack of education tools to upskill vulnerable adults. Thank you, Juliana. Janina, inequality of opportunity in Peru and pollution in the sky. Interesting. I know you're from Brillantes Originales, right? The project that you're building. Benjamin, minimizing the environmental impact of copper mining through real-time monitoring of mining waste using advanced technologies like sensors and satellite. Oh, you have a problem and a solution already. Great. Nice. Okay, so different problems. Somebody else? Mental health access. Great. How to record, share screen and host a meeting together without making the pieces loud. Thank you, Sophia. That's also my problem, constantly on Zoom somehow. Combating racism in the football and sport. Hi, Rafael. Nice, thank you. Inequality of opportunity in the global south and development through regenerative models. Thank you, Selina. Yes. Your project is Tres Tiempos, right? Yes. Nice. I see a lot of the people who applied for our mentoring program are here today. Nice, nice to see all of you. Okay, so I will just move on. It's great to see how you already have problem very clear. So today what we're going to show you is how to take this problem at the right level and understanding all the ecosystem around these problems so that you can build more successful and impactful social businesses. So we are in our roadmap. In our roadmap, we are today Sorry, that's how it is today. Slow and it's not working. Yes. We are, as I said, on the system thinking workshop, and afterwards we will have with us Bita Correa from FUNDAEC organization. It's an organization in Colombia that has revolutionized the way in which they provide capacity building programs and empower local communities. So I'm very happy that they will be with us, and that's why we had this session on system thinking. Usually we do at the beginning, but because Bita Correa could join us today, that's why we moved this session to today, so that we have a proper introduction into the session with Bita. Whenever like we talk about why do we focus on system thinking whenever we build social businesses, from the work of Professor Yunus, from which we also the concept of social business started, we start really from a simple vision that a charity dollar has one life, right? You donate a charity dollar and then you just support a community, and that ends somehow there. A social business dollar keeps being reinvested to make that project grow. And with this kind of model that has been built, and we're going to show you today some models from Bangladesh, which have been working like this, we believe that social business can really create jobs and change entire industries and change really the lives of many people. And in order to achieve that, it's really important to understand the problems that we're trying to solve with social business in a systemic way, because then we can really understand the different levels that we're going to touch with social business. When Professor Yunus created the Grameen Bank, for example, in Bangladesh, he didn't start by thinking, oh, I want to help women because I see that they're not holding money in their hands, so I'm going to create microcredit, and eventually I'm going to get a Nobel Peace Prize for that. No, what happened is that in 1971, when Bangladesh had become independent from Pakistan, the country was going through huge problems, systemic problems. So there had been, of course, economic and political problems and insurrections. The government structures were totally inefficient at the time. There was a huge famine that was going on in the country, where people were literally dying of hunger on the street. Because there had been also some huge floods. Among the worst floods in the years in Bangladesh had been made crops unpractical, basically. So even if Bangladesh had 13 million acres of land, only 16% of the land was used to produce food. So he started experimenting with farmers to create models that could support the production of food. And then eventually saw that farmers actually owned land, and there were people working for the farmers that were even poorer, and they were not getting richer, even if the crops were being productive. So he started going into the villages. He started talking to women, understanding why women were the poorest of the poorest. So there was really a systemic study that was going around. But what we know today was the Grameen Bank, but how it started, it was really by understanding a lot of systemic issues and why are the poorest like this, because they are poor because they are victims of the system. And that system is very important for us to understand whenever we start building social businesses. So that's what we're going to see today. We're going to see how we can use system thinking, that is a future skill, to build successful social businesses, as I was saying to you. I invite you now to really switch your mindset, because we tend always to focus on the solutions. Whenever we see a problem, we run immediately to the solution. But it's very important that we switch our mindset. And in Chinese, for example, it's interesting that the word problem or crisis is the same as opportunity. So you can switch the mind from a problem mode to an opportunity mode. But it's very important that we start from the problem. And that's also what Einstein said, for example, if we want to have more scientific resources, is if you have an hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and then 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. And that's also what we do with social business. We really deep dive into the problem. And that's what we're going to do today. Just like for me to have an understanding of where each of you is in understanding system thinking, what do you think system thinking is? If you can just type in the chat or unmic yourself as always. If you have encountered it, used it, what do you think that is connected to? These are just a couple of keywords that you see here. So what do you think is system thinking?
Hey, I don't know if you could hear me, but
Yes.
I've been actually right now really going into systems thinking and futures thinking. And basically, it's the mindset of that social issues, especially, are more complex than we think. It's not what we see in the superfice, but how deep they go and how interconnected they are. So, system thinking is the mindset of thinking of a problem not as its own being, but thinking what is it connected, what happens, and just go deeper.
Yeah, I think you gave a very good definition, exactly, because you said very important words. It's a mindset of the way you think about problems. It's understanding exactly the complexity of problems. It's understanding about the stakeholders, which are like rotating around a specific problem, understanding the connections between the stakeholders, the connections between the elements and the consequences, the cause and effect relationships as well about the specific elements. And that builds exactly a system. And the moment we use system thinking, it's also about try to understand the specific methodologies that help you try to make complex problems very simple to understand and really identifying the elements that are important then for you in a complex system. Thank you, Selina. Yes, and this is one of the methodologies that we usually this one. It's one of the methodologies that we usually use to understand complex problems in a simple way and use them for that to then generate our solutions. We will go through each step together with an example, and I will invite you at every step then to think about your personal problem that you're trying to solve. And we start with understanding, as I said, we call it the abstraction level of the problem. That is the size of the problem that you can then focus on and analyze, and that it's important then for your solution. And I'm going to go into the detail afterwards on this. Then, as I was saying, we identify the stakeholders. We try to understand the interests that each stakeholders have, because depending on this interest, you will understand also the relationship between the different stakeholders in the system. And then we go into the causal loop. So how are the elements of the system and the stakeholders related? And then we will usually what you end up having is these maps with all of these causal loops diagrams that connect all of the different parts. And then the important aspect that you then have to do is to categorize, these elements, understand which ones are going to be your targets, what are the factors that you need to consider into your system once you see all of these relationships, and how you can integrate them then into what is going to be your solution. So we are going to go now into mapping the system. If you have any questions, any comments so far, feel free to unmic yourself, raise your hand, or write it in the chat. But we're going to be a bit more practical now in the understanding all of these steps that we described. And we will do that using a case. It's a Grameen Shakti. It's one of the big social businesses that we see in that was created in Bangladesh by Professor Yunus. So once the Grameen Bank was created, a lot of social businesses were created around, for example, the women that were served through the Grameen Bank to provide them different kind of services, access to energy, access to healthcare, access to IT tools. This is Grameen Phone, for example, that you see here. And Grameen Shakti is basically the Grameen organization. Grameen means rural, so all of these organizations were like created to provide access to specific human rights and services for women in particular in rural communities in Bangladesh. Grameen Shakti means energy, so it was about providing energy. And of course, it was about providing renewable energy solutions with the objective of really empowering women in creating like green jobs, alleviating poverty. And I think they were created in the 90s, and since then have installed almost 2 million solar home systems. And today, the network of Grameen Shakti contributes to 30% of the total 12 million customers that are receiving the solar panels, and they introduced over 1 million clean cook stoves, biogas plants in all the country. I was in Bangladesh almost 1 year ago, more than 1 year ago, and I visited the Grameen Shakti, some customers that received solar panels from Grameen Shakti, and you could really see the impact that this was having on their life, because now of course, solar panels, their businesses could be open for more, so they could generate more money. The kids could, of course, stay longer to learn, for example, even when it was dark, when there were shortages of electricity in the country. So with energy, Grameen Shakti was able to really impact the lives of the communities they were serving very, very much. And going back into the problems, right? So we are at the 90s, and at the time in Bangladesh, 45% of the population had no access to electricity. And this, of course, as I was saying, had effects on the lives of the communities, because they couldn't really fulfill their economic activities, their social activities as well. Health access, of course, depended also on the energy. All the education in the communities depended on energy, right? And 85, the government was starting to invest in infrastructures, but 85% of all the Bangladesh electricity was generated using fossil fuels, and in particular natural gas. So they didn't invest in renewable energy sources, and still also the country was going through rapid economic growth with a rising population. You know, Bangladesh is among the most densely populated countries in the world. So there was an increasing demand in electricity, and that led often to shortages in the electricity supply as well. So in this context, on top of that, there was therefore an inconsistent power supply that was hampering this economic growth, and especially, of course, for the most vulnerable populations in the rural areas. And on the infrastructure overall as well was really not adequate to provide access to energy to these populations. And on top of that, these populations were affected by climate changes as well, right? Floods, different storms, cyclones were all continuously hampering the access to energy. So what is our problem in this case? You see, what we define now, it's a lot of problems which are interconnected. So what it's important to do in this phase is to understand the abstraction level of your problem. So one problem is, of course, for example, at the level of Bangladesh, the dependency on fossil fuel. We describe another problem, for example, problem level that is there's not enough infrastructure to produce green energy. That's another problem. There's another problem which goes a bit more into the daily lives of the communities, that, for example, some specific sectors, education and health, and the daily life of local communities are interrupted because of energy inaccessibility. And there's another level on which then Grameen Shakti focus, which is, going a bit more at community level, because that's where we want to focus, right? We want to focus at community level. And there what we see is that people with no transportation accessibility faces increasing challenges, and they don't have access to energy. So let's focus on more general communities which are more vulnerable and have low income. Why can't they access energy, and how can they access energy? So this was the abstraction level that the Grameen Shakti focused on. So now, thinking about those problems that you were mentioning at the beginning, So I think, Benjamin, you raise your hand, please.
Hi,
Hey.
thank you so much, Maria, for all this information. I have some pretty short questions
Yes.
about this problem because so we understand that we have a 15% of people in Bangladesh, right, who are not able to get access with electricity.
Mhm.
So understanding that, so what are the principal causes of why they don't get access to that electricity?
Exactly.
Because I don't
Yeah.
know if they are pretty close to a mountain or well, regarding that,
Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
What if we understand that in a society or in a sector, 15% of a pretty big amount of people, we understand that it's pretty concentrated, this
Yeah.
amount of area, they don't get access to the most basic way of get electricity, which fuel, I don't know, biomass.
Yeah. Biomass.
I don't
Yes.
know how to say that. Um,
Exactly.
why we must to foster we understand that we have levels, right? Levels in growth. We start with the most basic. We understand that it's not the most
Yeah.
it's not the most how can I say good for the environment.
Yeah.
It's not the
Yeah.
best for the environment, but we
Yeah.
must to satisfy the demand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm clear with that. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. So
maybe
I answer to you. I start answering to the first aspect that you were saying. So exactly, you asked the right questions. Okay, but who are these people who can access like energy? You first need to identify exactly like the problem at this level, right? And the thing is that because of the economic growth, what was happening in Bangladesh is the phenomenon that people were moving also to big cities. There was a huge phenomenon of urbanization. So even the way in which the even and so I asked Sabir in case if you have other points to add as well, because Sabir is also from Bangladesh and we did this case together. But basically, in the moment in which everything moves towards the industrialization, right? So all the electricity that was accessible through fossil fuel, etc., is moving towards the areas where you need electricity for that, right? So you have all of the rural communities, and that's where exactly the problem was, that had no access to electricity. Or like maybe they had limited access because then there were continuously shortages because the electricity was then used mainly in the cities. So that's why in that specific situation, they focused on those communities that were having this shortage of electricity. And as you rightly said, okay, but it's so easy, right? You have biomass, and in rural areas, you could have a lot of biomass, but communities didn't know how to translate that into electricity. So that's why then, of course, Grameen Shakti started doing that. But then, okay, how can we support these communities to create renewable forms of energy that they can use?
Oh,
But then,
perfect. Thank you so much. And
yes,
these people have the knowledge to manage with this renewable energy because,
that's where Grameen Shakti intervened. So you did have to do some basic level of training or provide simple solutions, because you rightly have a right question. Okay, but do they have the knowledge then to maybe use specific technologies to create energy, right? So you need to also include some capacity building in that direction. And that's what they were trying to understand. Okay, why don't they have access to energy, and who needs access to energy as he's not receiving it, and how can then afterwards comes the how can we do that?
thank you so much, Maria. I
Yes.
understand completely. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sorry, Mary. I just
Please,
wanted to
Sabir.
add
Yes.
I just wanted to add a little bit to the whole point. So one of like among all the things you have mentioned, one of the main reasons, let's say the remote areas of Bangladesh do not have access to electricity, is the constant rainfall and flood. So
Yeah.
Bangladesh is like a country with a lot of people, and we have 6 seasons. every year. So, and among those 6 seasons, like 2.5, there is like heavy rainfall. Bangladesh, like basically situated in a delta in between three big rivers, and which branches out into many, like around 700 rivers. So when the rainfall happens, it's a lot, and every year there is at least 2, 3 areas that gets flooded severely, which also causes the landslides and other stuff. So at some point when they started to build the infrastructure for the electricity, what happened is like in 2, 3 months the flood happened and everything is gone. So it continued for a few months, and then at some point they started to build the dams and other things. But however, there are still some regions where they cannot go because of these problems, like which is completely isolated. There is no road there to go, so they have to like pass by boats and other things, and it is very difficult. And that's where actually Gramin Shakti comes in with their solar solutions. And speaking of the knowledge, as far as I know, there is another organization called Gramin Shikha. So it offers this capacity building and the education program to those people who just receives those solar panels, how to use them properly, how to protect them, how to conserve the energy to use for the day when there is no sun, and vice versa. I think Maria also had a conversation with the people from Gramin Shikha, if I'm not wrong.
But especially Gramin Shakti as well. We will see now they were considering these aspects when implementing also their solar panels. I wanted them to bring you to your personal problem now. This was just to inspire you and make you understand, the different levels of a problem. If you had to think about your personal problem, for example, at what abstraction level would you go? So if you can think about that, you can write it in the chat, or you can unmic yourself and share it. We can wait 5 minutes, 3 to how much you need. And here is just like the who, what, when, why, where, how, is just to guide you a bit more into focusing your problem statement at the right abstraction level. So write it in the chat when you're done. We have some problem statements, or somebody wants to share their consideration? Thank you, Olivia. We saw before the different abstractions levels. So what level do you choose? So you can write exactly the problem statement that is at the basis of your project, of your social business. And you need to decide which abstraction level, if you're more at the general level, of a country level, or like at a community level, a city level, or the target specifically on which you're focusing, the when, if there's a specific, for example, like a temporal aspect that influence your problem statement, and the why maybe. So this is just like the 5 whys and the H to guide you into the definition, but then what is really important is to understand the abstraction level, so the level at which you focus on for your problem statement. It's very challenging to synthesize it, yes, Nicholas, yes, because we tend to think also, like very big, and that's exactly the thing, that you can't solve a big problem, and that's why we need to put it at the right abstraction level on which you can focus on. So if you're focusing, for example, on supporting, like a mental health access, for example, in the all Colombia, it's very generic. So it's important that you narrow it down to the level you want to focus on, which can be, for example, the youth. I think Miriam wrote about the mental health access before as a problem in the check-in. So at what level? Is there some specific youth you're targeting? Or is there a specific city, a specific region, a specific community has been particularly affected by something, by an event, and where and when? This kind of elements can help you in choosing the right level on which you focus on at the beginning. But it's something that we can also continue working on. If there's somebody who wants to share anything, I'm happy to hear.
I can share.
Please.
It basically is youth in rural communities. Right now we're working in Achocalla, Bolivia. That is a specific case because it's a small town between two of the biggest cities of La Paz. They need capacity building aside on formal education during formative years to create leadership that allows economic development and impact in their communities, to prevent migration, aging population, and deepening cycles of property. Because we have this problem that happens that youth migrate to these cities, even though this small town is really close, 20 minutes by car to these big cities, they are not having even basic levels of development. So how we can empower them to create these solutions.
So you see, for example, in your description, you already went into the solution, providing a capacity building. You see, it's very easy to go immediately into the solution mode. So your problem basically is that you youth in this small town is facing unemployment, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is where you start from. So you see your level is youth in this specific town, for example. And the reason why is they are facing like unemployment for these specific reasons. So you're already going a bit into the analysis of the problem, but you can stop at this like abstraction level, for example, and that helps you because then you can focus exactly on a specific problem with a specific model. And then maybe this is a problem that is not just affecting the city, this village, but is affecting maybe other villages around the big cities. Yeah. Somebody else who would like to share? Otherwise, we go on.
I can also share. I'm not sure that it's okay, but
please.
I'm focusing on women, especially mothers. That what happens is that because they are or teenage mom or they have like to work since a young age, they have to drop out of school, and after they drop out of school, they cannot like continue their studies, and this make like happens is that most of the families that are like female headed lives in poverty or extreme poverty. So for example, here in Colombia, 44% of the families are female headed, and 58% live in poverty or extreme poverty. And because they cannot like upskill and have like a technical education, their job opportunities are limited. So this is something that happens in most of Latin American countries, that the families headed with by female are the most vulnerable. So the idea is my idea is to create a Duolingo for upskilling these women.
And it's very good how you identify the problem, because you identified a problem in Colombia. And it's good that you have also, for example, these percentages, right? That you say, okay, there's a 45, you said, percent of the families are female-led, often single mothers, and X percentage of these families are poor, because so there's these limitations in job opportunities for the moms. The way you structured the problem, abstraction and definition, is really good. Yeah. I think Nicolas also had
Maria, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So in Bento, we are a platform service for mental health for young people. And the problem I was sketching, because it's a little bit difficult for me to synthesize it, is that mental health challenges are increasingly prevalent, estimating that 15 to 75% of mental health issues begin between the ages of 14 and 24 years old.
In Colombia?
In the world.
In the world,
for young people, yeah.
And your platform is based in Colombia, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be good, for example, to find the data for Colombia in your case. Okay, great.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you all for sharing. I go forward. Yes. So we try to understand the problem, and then we try to understand now the key stakeholders in the system. Going back to our example of Grameen Shakti, they started understanding, okay, who are these poor communities and where do they live? And when they looked at the rural areas, of course, you have like households who don't have access to energy. You also have smaller local businesses. You have rural clinics who were not able to operate properly because of the lack of energy and access to energy. There were also, like in these rural areas, there's a lot of NGOs as well. There's local government offices. What do you have also? You have religious institutions. You have educational institutions, of course. You have mosques, temples. So you see, if you start mapping out all the key stakeholders in the system, you realize that first, this is not a problem only maybe of poor households in the villages, but it's an all system that is operating at those households that are supporting those households that don't have access to the energy as well. Then you start realizing also, for example, who could be partners for you and who could be instead like maybe supporters, who could be an obstacle for you. So in that phase, you go, right? And that's where you go into the interest. So you're starting understanding like the interest of the different stakeholders that you mapped out, right? So if we look at, of course, the local communities, they need electricity for their daily household activities. They might have small businesses. They need electricity because then otherwise they can't work over certain hours. If you have a shop, for example, and you're offering some specific services, without electricity, you have to shut down very early, right? there were hospitals, of course, they needed to support patients in an uninterrupted way. Otherwise, like if your machinery is like stop working, it's really bad for the health of the patients, right? And at the same time, you have an interest which is to keep your costs very low because you need a lot of energy, but you need all that. You need to do that with the lower costs as well, right? Then you have the educational, religious, of course, institutions. They also needed energy for uninterrupted services. They also have a lot of pressure on the costs, for example, like I mean, all of them, of course. And then you also have, of course, the public and the private sector that had to like continue in an uninterrupted way. So it's very important to understand. In this case, you see that the interest of all of the stakeholders, these stakeholders in the systems, for example, are mainly focused on the use of electricity, but we could expand this system and thinking, for example, about the government more at like a national level. What is their interest? Why are they they're focusing, of course, more on the industrialized areas. And as Sabir was saying before, if they invest in rural areas, then like a flood happen and everything is destroyed. So it's like a lost investment somehow. So, or maybe we can think about other kind of stakeholders and their interests. So if you map out all the stakeholders and you understand their interests, you're then able to understand then how you can engage your stakeholders, the different stakeholders in your model. So we're going to take a little break again, and you think about the stakeholders around you and what are their interests. And when you do the exercise, maybe if you can share with us if you identified new stakeholders that you didn't think about before, or if this exercise made you think that the interests of some stakeholders are somehow maybe different than what you thought before. So map out the stakeholders and their interests. Yes.
So sorry, Maria, could you be some kind of going one slide
Yes.
back, please?
Before? Yes.
Yes.
This one, huh? Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much.
All good, all good. So while we do this exercise, I saw that Bita in the meantime entered the room. Hello, Bita. We're almost, hi. We're almost done here. Then we take a little break and then we're going to start with
No
your
problem.
session. Thank you so much for being here.
No, I just wanted to make sure that the logistics were okay, so that's why I
Yes.
joined already.
That's great. Thanks. How's the mapping going? Still 2 minutes. In the meantime, if somebody wants to share, feel free to unmute yourself. If you're having some difficulties, we can discuss about them as well. I'm reading a question from Nicholas. If we work in promotion and prevention, one of our stakeholders can be hospitals, or it's better to focus on other institutions like universities, schools, and enterprises. My suggestion is to map them out all. Hospitals, if you have different levels of hospitals like rural clinics or like also these different levels, private, public, map it all out. Schools, universities, enterprises, they also need to be mapped, because you need to map those institutions where the people are, because in your case the problem is very wide, right? You see, you work in promotion and prevention, you're saying, but you have to go back to the problem and like what are all the stakeholders rotating about the people that are affected by mental health, like lack of access to specific promotions or specific problems. So like I would really suggest to first map everything out, understand the interests of each stakeholder. So for example, I don't know, it can be hospitals are overwhelmed with specific other illnesses and they don't have the resources, to tackle mental health, for example. And on the other side, for example, there can be another interest. For universities, it's very important that they tackle a specific, like mental health, for example, issues among young people, because this will influence some specific aspects for them. The fact that they will have more students proceeding, for example, with their studies. So you need to understand the interests of all the different stakeholders. And I see Benjamin is saying that one of our main stakeholders are private and public sector. It's generic. Go deeper into understanding exactly which stakeholders are rotating around. In your cases, it's the mining, right? Communities. What are the stakeholders around that? You need to go deeper into that and understanding their interests. Nicola, sorry, you raised your hand, please.
Sorry, Maria, I wanted a little bit back.
Yeah.
Because of the comment you gave me.
Yeah, please.
So like the main problem I think is like the prevalence of the mental health issues in young people. But when you go to analyze like the big picture of the problem, like for example, the capacity of hospitals to attend mental health issues is like now it doesn't have the capacity. So like the solution is going back and working in promotion and prevention. So like if I start writing, I can see a lot of problems, but I don't like I
you don't see an interest
like
in dealing with that.
Sorry?
You don't see the interest in dealing with that, you mean?
Yeah, it's difficult because I see a lot of problems, like it's very like it's systematic, and I don't know how to atomize that problem.
Then, for example, because I think it's important that you focus on the young people and what are the parties around them. For example, even families. I remember you were saying on Wednesday, right, that you're thinking of making also parents pay for a service, right? Why? What is the interest behind families? Maybe the interest behind the mom and the dad could also be different, or the different people around the family. Like that, maybe there are other, for example, youth centers, for example, that can also be NGOs working around youth. Those are also like stakeholders that could rotate around it, right? The local communities. What could be the interest of local communities? For example, on this. So the important is just you map them out. And then, as you rightly say, you realize, okay, but for hospital, there's not really an interest in being involved. But maybe you could leverage on hospitals in another way. It doesn't have to be where you sell your services, how you interact with them, but maybe they could have another role later on because they might still interact with your system. Because, for example, an important element that we have in Germany is the health insurances. The health insurances are overwhelmed because they're supporting a lot of mental health programs, for example, right now, because they're super overwhelmed in the past, especially COVID played a key role, of course, but especially there's like a huge burnouts happening in companies, for example, and there are also a lot of kids in schools that are like affected by mental health. So they are really supporting a lot of programs because at the end of the day, if you start having mental health problems in schools, you're eventually going to have so many problems later that it's going to affect the workforce in the future, right? So the insurance companies, the health insurance companies that are supporting companies, they are being incredibly burnt because they have to pay so much money, no? Today for people that are burning out. So they can imagine if this is continuing on this trajectory, the future workforce is going to be completely burnout. So they're investing in a lot of programs around youth mental health, for example. So we had a social business from Germany last year, was working with in schools, providing mental health workshops and app, etc. And they found, for example, in the health insurance companies, huge supporters of their programs. So you see this kind of thinking also in the system, in the wider system. Also companies in the future, if you have something similar like the state, here we have private and public health insurances, for example, systems. So maybe this could also enlarge the system.
Thank you, Maria, for the explanation. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. I will conscious of time, I don't know if somebody wanted to make any other comment, but I would like to close the session because I still have a couple of things to show you. But then you can do the exercises on your own and you can share them with us as well afterwards. We're happy to provide you with some feedback as well. And it's important to do, sorry, my slides are going on their own. What it's important to do afterwards is also then to create what we call feedback loop. So you create these cause and effect relationships within the different stakeholders, right? And on the one hand, so for example, we said, okay, if the local communities have less, of course, electricity to take care of their everyday activities, they will also have less, also their businesses will face limitations. So this will improve also the poverty, for example, in rural areas. And that will create even more problems because they will make energy even less accessible for local communities. And on the one hand, if you have less access to energy, this is going to also lead to people, for example, having more health issues, for example. So hospitals will be overrun, for example, and this will lead to even more poor health services in the rural areas. And on the other hand, we see that also education is going to be affected because people are more poor and they will have less access to education. So afterwards, what you do is you build these connections between different elements of your system and you try to understand, for example, to make also the other example on the mental health problem. Okay, if young people today are affected by mental health problems and issues at the early age, this is going to have a consequence, for example, for companies in the future because they're going to be the health forces. And if this is happening, then also the economy is going to go like this. So you see all of these loops are important to build because then you can understand, okay, this is my system now, all of this connection, in which area can I have an impact that is going to change this system and it's going to invert these loops. So you can understand then how your social business is going to affect this system and it's going to create a positive impact. And that is something that you can then use really at the basic of your social business and also of your story, because you really saw this is the effect that can have on the system. It's not just we're solving a legal problem. So conscious of time, I'm going to continue, but I leave you to do this. And this was a bit the effects that also, Grameen Shakti and all the network of businesses created around the Grameen Bank were having a systemic impact. Sorry, I'm trying to go forward with the slides. Yes. So Just to sum up this session, and of course, like it's something so complex that it takes like usually we run like full day workshops to go through really like systems and understanding the connections with them. So this was just like a little taste for you, to see that how you can look at problems from very different perspectives, just thinking about stakeholders and the different interests and like different elements around the system. So we wanted to just invite you to expand your boundaries and think about new links when you analyze your problem. And an important thing is also to re-challenge your problem, like your system, and go back to it several times, go deeper into the problem. And I go back to what I started saying at the beginning, to love the problems you're solving. We always say we fall in love with the problems. And we do it then with joy at the end of the day. So we're going to take a little break. If you have questions, feel free to add them. Otherwise, we can take a little break, 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to continue our session with Bita. Questions or comments?
Well, I profoundly appreciate all the important information we have received. I think it's pretty important to address all the possible stakeholders, because, well, I never thought that we could talk with a government in the case of public-private sector. I just talk on the mining sector. So, well, thinking on I thought on the government, and well, we can try to make like a conclusion. I could learn a lot of this system thinking. So, thank you so much.
Okay, I'm happy to hear. And there's different levels as well, at the government level as well. So there's different levels that you could even go deeper into. Municipal, regional, national. Yeah, nice. So have a little break, some coffee, some water. We see each other soon. Okay, so we started second session. So we saw a little bit, the theory behind system thinking. And now we always bring you some examples of social businesses, organizations that really implement the principles that we just presented. And I'm really happy to introduce you to Bita Correa. So we can get into the session now. I hope everybody's back. And I was just looking for the long name of FUNDAEC because so Bita, you're the executive director of FUNDAEC, which I didn't know is the Foundation for the Application and Teaching of the Sciences, and it has become a brand by itself. But there is like an explanation behind it, and I'm super happy that you're here today to really present your unique way of how you brought education into the development sector by really bringing capacity buildings at levels that affect systemically the communities. So we are open ears. Thank you so much for joining us in this program, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Maria, and it is very nice to see everyone, and good morning, good afternoon. Really, I think that, when I was approached and asked to join you today and to participate and sort of to share a little bit about FUNDAEC's experience, it's always a little bit sort of daunting to think of like where to start, because it's FUNDAEC is an organization that actually is turning 50 years this year. It was founded in 1974 in Colombia. And so over these 50 years of existence, really, it has been able to to learn some, I think, fundamental ideas around its approach and around the way to work maybe with individuals, with communities, and on some very, I think, basic principles that we could say that are both premises, but also things that we're trying to prove whether they're right or not, and whether those are some maybe ways in which we can approach education and which we can approach development as well. So, so I think that one of the things that's very important for everyone is to really acknowledge that we all operate within a conceptual framework, or we all operate within a set of parameters and a set of questions and a set of assumptions that we make. And sometimes those sort of that framework or those assumptions that we operate in are not explicit, or are not even clear for ourselves. And so sort of we go into the details, and we try to think of like, okay, what is the program that I'm thinking about, or what are the outcomes that I want to get, or what are the results. But all of that is actually operating within a particular framework, and a particular framework of how we are thinking of the world, how we're thinking of the individuals that we are interacting with, of how we are thinking of the purpose, the larger purpose of our program. Now, I think if we can go back one slide. Sorry, this is I'm taking a longer introduction to just begin. So I think that for FUNDAEC, this question of sort of what are those principles or what are those premises is one that we've grappled with over time. And so that's why I think the first question that we had was really this one of development, and sort of like, what does development mean? And what is it when we talk about social and economic development, when we talk about prosperity, when we talk about improving people's lives, like, what does that mean? How are we defining prosperity? Is it about just material prosperity? Is it about well-being? Is it about the individual as a whole? So these are I think some of the questions that we began to grapple with. And then that really led us to a question of also the purpose of education. So I think one of the principal ideas that FUNDAEC had was that it was through education that really we could begin to think about development, and that it wasn't really sort of thinking of education as something as an end in and of itself, but as how do we use education and how do we use the power of education to really help people develop their own capacities. And that sort of leads us to another premise, or another sort of initial question, which was this idea that every individual sort of requires the development of their own particular characteristics and their own qualities and their own sort of set of strengths, but also in the context of their surrounding. And that we can't sort of separate the two. So there's also the development of the individual and development of their own qualities and their own capabilities, but then also the development of their communities and their environment as well. And that when we think of a particular region, or that when FUNDAEC began to think of a particular region that it was working with, and when it began, it was concentrated in the Norte del Cauca region in Colombia, there was also this very important notion of universal participation, that basically somehow, when we think of change, and when we think of development, and when we think of sort of how we envision the change that we want to see in the world, it has to come from the sum of everyone. And that really, like, this is not only going to come from a few individuals who have like wonderful and bright ideas, and that's necessary, and they're going to sort of have revolutionary sort of programs or projects and things like that, but we also need the participation of every single individual. And like, it's also the sum of all of these individual sort of efforts that make a big difference. So those are some of the premises that FUNDAEC began to work with. So in terms of this question of universal participation, I think this idea that FUNDAEC had at the beginning was that everyone should become a protagonist of their own development, that everyone should, again, like, have a role to play. in their own development and in the development of their community. But then there was some other question, which was like, how will change come about, or how can everyone contribute? And I think part of it was then that really we had to concentrate on a bottoms-up approach, that we really had to concentrate on thinking of the sum of the actions of thousands and thousands of individuals to actually really bring about change. Again, this is not to say that, you know, that policy change or that change at the level of the government or of thought or is not necessary and not important, but that's sort of another sphere of work, and that FUNDAEC decided to focus its efforts or its work on this bottom-up approach without now saying that it's the most important or that's the only one, but like somehow that we need to be thinking about change, and we need to be thinking about sort of the impact that we want to make through these different strategies that somehow meet in the middle as well. So then FUNDAEC began to think about this question of capabilities that I was mentioning at the beginning. So what is the notion of capabilities, and what is the notion of that everyone has the possibility to contribute? So if we say that everyone should contribute, what does it mean that everyone has the potential to do it? So really what it began to do was that it began to focus its efforts on developing educational materials. And these educational materials then took a sort of a different lens. And the lens that it took was that it wasn't, or it isn't rather, organized around maybe traditional forms of knowledge, but really around this notion of what are the capabilities that individuals need to have to be able to have the skills, the knowledge, the qualities to contribute to the well-being of their community. So that was basically the premise. So how do we sort of organize educational material or educational curriculum in a way that it actually helps individuals develop those capabilities? And then the curriculum itself that was developed over time was organized around certain areas. So the areas of language and mathematics, of science, and processes of community life. And these were also sort of divided into capabilities as well. So the capabilities related to language. So for example, being able to describe the world around us, to be able to make statements about the world, or for example, in mathematics, to be able to make numerical statements, to be able to use data, to be able to, in science, maybe to make observations about the physical world around us. So these were some of the capabilities that we began sort of to work with and to organize our curriculum around. So then the question becomes, how do you go from theory to practice? So how does this connect to economic livelihoods? And I think basically what we have seen is that, or sort of the approach or the choice that was taken was that really first we needed to understand the environment, or sort of we needed to understand what people's needs were, where they were coming from, or their cultural context, and also through education, or through educational processes rather, sort of build a foundation that would eventually lead to economic change, or to entrepreneurship, or to sort of these more tangible, I think, like elements that we often think of. So in a way, we didn't begin to address, or our questions haven't really been about the end goal or the fruit, which one could say can be, for example, some sort of entrepreneurship endeavor, but rather the educational process that is needed to be able to get to that point. So our focus has been more around, so what does that education look like? What are the capacities that people need? What are the sort of the information that they need to gather? What is the knowledge that they need to acquire, so that slowly they can decide what is that ultimate goal, and what is that ultimate sort of like event in a way that they get to. But for some of them, it will be entrepreneurship, and for some of them, it will be small businesses. But for others, it will be other things. It will be joining, going to university or gaining a higher education or deciding to enter a certain field. So in a way, it's not that we are choosing sort of what that end goal is, but rather, again, as I was mentioning, sort of focusing on this process of education. So, but because I know that this sort of workshop is focused on this idea of entrepreneurship, I wanted to share with you two cases that we've seen that have been based on this educational approach to actually see sort of the results or what people begin to do in this path. So one of the programs that we have is the Preparation for Social Action program, which we also call the PSA program. And it's an educational program that's sort of its main audience or its main target are youth between the ages of 15 to 25. And these youth are usually already in school. They're going to finishing their high school diplomas, or maybe are in university. And the program is it's derived from a formal education, like the curriculum is derived from a formal education program that we had, but the PSA program is non-formal in that it is non-degree conferring. So it's not a program that is focused in the formal education space, but rather it's a program that is complementary to the education that they are receiving. So this program encourages individuals with these premises that I mentioned to participate in the development of their community. And they have a lot of opportunities through the curriculum and through what they're studying to engage in a number of productive activities, in service activities, in research, in a lot of opportunities to really engage with their community, with their environment, with their families as members as well. So what we have seen is that through this program, then what we've decided to have is to sort of help the students go through a process that helps them learn about how to establish their own businesses. But again, this is not something that, for example, all the students will do at the end. But for now, what we want to focus on is how do we help them have an educational experience which allows them to at least acquire some of the skills that they need, if that is a path that they choose to pursue. But for example, before getting to that point, then we have worked on enhancing their mathematical skills so they can actually, for example, have like the basis that is necessary to carry out basic accounting or to follow statistics of a program or whatever that may be. So maybe if we look at the next slide. So in this area, then what we see is that we begin with the students, and after they've advanced maybe roughly a year, the program is 2.5 years long. So maybe once they're halfway through the program, they go through this educational experience. So there's this material that is written for them. They consult as a group. They decide what is the business sort of, or the small productive activity that they want to do as a group. And they go through the entire cycle of planning for it, of finding the funds for it, of whatever, if it's, for example, selling something, selling the activity, making profit, seeing how they're going to use that profit. And it's just a positive, full sort of cycle experience that they go through as a group. Then what we've seen is that from that, some individuals then begin to have productive projects that like last a bit longer. So for example, sometimes some students or some teachers or tutors of the program decide to maybe have like a 6-month project that they do now on their own. So in some ways, like this educational experience they do with the group, they do as part of what they're learning, but then they go and they start doing something on their own, or maybe with 1 or 2 other people or with their families, but it usually has a beginning and an end. But then from there, actually what we've seen is that there's even a subset of individuals who establish their own businesses. So what we've seen is that in a way there's three categories, or there's a progression in this establishment of these units. So we begin with educational experiences within the program. Then from these, some people begin to have what we call productive projects, which last longer but still have a duration. And then from that, there's a subset that actually begins their own businesses as well. So for example, how we've categorized these business units is that they actually create jobs, that they have customers that come to these businesses, that the assets that they have exceed 3 million pesos, which is roughly maybe around 800 US right now with the exchange rate, that is recognized in the community as being sort of a business that is established, that exists. And we've also created a seed fund, which allows them to have access to funds to begin their business as well. So then it's a rotatory fund that they can they receive a loan from, but then they pay back at very low or no interest. So the current status, for example, of some of the experiences that we've had now at this higher level of the business is that we have 21 established businesses from these groups or from these students that employ over 75 people directly, and it's established in 6 different departments of the country. And then some of the examples of the types of businesses that people begin to establish, you can see here, are bakeries and pastries, photocopy shops, tailoring, handicrafts, village stores. So for example, actually beginning to have a store that serves a village, beauty salons, etc. You can see the list of examples there as well. So that's the first case. And then, for example, another thing that we've seen, which has derived from this program, has been a collective sort of a project which began with a question of being concerned about the environment and how to take care of the environment. And so collectively, the program decided to actually have a project which was called Transforming the Environment, which helped with both food production and food security, but also the conservation of the environment. So currently, these groups have planted, I think, over 17,000 trees in the country, which many of them are fruit trees. Many of them, sort of the idea is to help this idea of food sovereignty as well. And in the same way as with the businesses, in a way, the groups can do their own sort of individual projects and they can decide what they want to do. But then now this is a more complex aspect. This is a collective or a national sort of campaign that they've begun on. So we see that basically through like a robust educational program, then there's things that begin to emerge slowly from that. So we have the businesses that begin to emerge. We have some projects which are, focusing on the environment, which are not only individual, but then collective. But it's all based on focusing first on education. And these are sort of the results that, of course, one wants to get to. But in a way, we're getting to those results in a different way. We're not tackling them directly, but we're getting through them through this educational process. So for this project of transforming the environment, these are just some of the statistics, some of the things that have been planted and produced. And then also this idea that families have planted individual gardens as well, which help also sustain them. So even though this is not sort of a direct model in terms of, establishing businesses, but it is also a way that they are, that families and communities are improving their sort of economic livelihoods through having access also to sort of this question of food security being addressed. So the second case that I wanted to share with you today is another project that we have, which it's a 2-year project. It's called Cultivating Hope. And it's a project that works with the establishment of a demonstrative regenerative agricultural farm, where farmers can come and learn about these regen practices and how to incorporate this in their own farms. So basically what we have is that we've established this demonstrative farm, and we have roughly right now over 40 farmers, small stakeholder farmers that are associated with this farm, and they come and they get training and they learn about sort of a bit about the theory of like of regenerative agriculture, or about climate change, or why somehow these practices are important. But then there's also a lot of practical courses that they take. So for example, how can you measure the health of the soil that they're working with, or how do you build organic fertilizers, both liquid and solid, or how can you associate crops. So there's many different sort of types of trainings and courses that are given at this demonstrative farm. But then the idea is that we help the farmers then begin to see how they can begin that transition back to a regenerative agricultural sort of model. And it's a process. The idea is that they can go at their own pace, they can go at their own comfort, and that it also doesn't imply like a large financial risk for them, because there's a seed fund that has also been established to help them in that transition. So that's another project that we're working with in this area of agriculture, but that again takes sort of the fundamental principles that I was mentioning before around education and around capacity building and around universal participation in this other area, which is not now this sort of educational program that I was explaining, but rather actually, and working with youth, but now rather working with small farmers. So since this is a 2-year project, and it's a project that has recently begun, what we are looking to do now, or sort of a second phase of the project, yes, if we can go to the next slide, is this idea of actually beginning to help establish small businesses around compost centers and community nurseries. Because then what we've seen from this project, for example, is that on the one hand, people don't have access to nurseries, or basically like the trees that they have access to, or the plants or whatever that they have access to are basically very limited and few. So there's a lot of plants that are becoming endangered, and native plants that are being lost. So there's this question of access on the one hand, but then also when we talk about, for example, restoration of soil, or when we talk about regenerative agriculture, then there's also a need for organic fertilizers. And if people also don't have organic fertilizers, then how are they supposed to sort of make that transition? So for example, the establishment of compost centers as well, where people can, of course, people can make their own, and that's part of what they're learning in the farm, but then that can also be a business model. So what we're trying to now begin to establish is, can we help maybe some 20 individuals, some families begin to establish like one compost center, which can be its own sort of business model, and a nursery. I mean, they could be joint, or also they can be two sort of two separate businesses in 6 communities in this region that we're working with. And so the idea is to train these individuals to actually establish these businesses, and to make an economic plan, and to see if they're economically feasible. And then our impact, or our universe, are of course over 2,000 individuals who live in these 6 communities, which will be having the access to the trees and to the organic fertilizer material as well. So in these 2 cases, what we see is that we begin sort of with an educational process, and we begin with a sort of a very like a wider scope in a way. And then from there are some things which begin to emerge, which are these sort of income generating activities, which are a result of the educational process, but that are not sort of the starting point from where we begin. So if we go on, so I think some of the maybe conclusions or summaries of what I've shared with you this morning is that really, as I was mentioning, we've tried to address this question of economic livelihood through an education and through a participation point of view. We haven't sort of addressed it head on, but we've gone through this other route. We've really focused on developing the capabilities of individuals to help them make their own choices and then to be able to decide, okay, this is what I'm interested in. What I want to do is in this area, or my abilities are actually in bread making or in sewing, and sort of just giving them that basic toolkit for them to decide what are the areas that then they want to focus on. Another thing that I think has been very useful has been this idea of having all individuals or all groups go through this educational experience initially to help them learn in practice where there are very low risks. So somehow they can make all the mistakes, they can learn everything together, they can go through the entire process. And then from there, those people who are naturally inclined to actually go on and have their own sort of projects or eventually their own businesses can have that initial experience. And also I think another lesson I think that we've learned is the importance of connecting with existing structures and this idea of allowing, in many of these cases, it has been our own structures, but allowing for small business loans or grants or things like that, because of course, not all of these small businesses can get off the ground, or the requirements are that they need to actually begin are quite high on them and they can't meet them. So also actually having some seed funds, some possibilities for them to have access to funds is also quite necessary. And that's also a connection between sort of this local grassroots development of initiatives, but also how you actually have to connect them with something greater. And part of sort of that connection has to be to funds. So I think that is it for today. These are just some pictures of some of the students, of some of the types of activities that they carry out. And that is it for today. And we wanted to give some time, I think, for some questions. So thank you. So Maria, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Bita, for the incredible presentation. So we have heard a lot about FUNDAEC from Peter Spiegel, from the Friends of Social Business. He has studied many years the FUNDAEC model, because like for us, at least in social business, we're always at the empowering local communities. You're always in the middle phase with development and charity models. So this model of FUNDAEC, we were thinking, was particularly relevant because it really shows this participation model and this like educational model that is really focused on around the livelihoods of the people, and then like giving the free choices once the people get the capabilities to how they use those skills for like building their own activities, and at the same time building in a systemic way all the tools that they need, also these seed funds, for example, because of course, like you do need the funds at the end for any kind of business that you want to create at different levels, or like from how with the smallholder farmers you understood that for regenerative agriculture you need this compost. So how you kept really developing systemic kind of like educative solutions for like the communities, starting small and then like growing as you grew in like these 50 years. So for us, it's like a super inspirational, the methodology that you used. I don't know if there are questions in the room from somebody. I don't want to take too much of the floor. I don't know if my connection is maybe it's low as well.
Mhm.
Petra, you had a question?
Bita, I think thanks very much for your presentation and all what you shared with us. I think it could be also inspiring for the people if you can make some additional remarks about the process of the whole FUNDAEC organization, beginning with especially with the SAT concept of education. At the beginning of your presentation, you have spoken of some remarks from this, but I think it is could be very interesting for all participants now to realize what a big educational concept and system came out from this from that what you presented to help the people to become more entrepreneurs for their whole life. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So I think, you know, in summary, because it can be a long story, I think in summary, what ended up happening was that in this process that I was describing of, you know, taking these principles and trying to understand what they meant in action, what FUNDAEC ended up developing was a curriculum, was sort of materials. Because it was really thinking also of this question of scaling and how do you not only focus on, you know, having one very good teacher or one really good sort of person who can explain certain things, but how do you actually systematize and how do you consolidate that? So what ended up happening was that a curriculum was developed in which a lot of the initial research that FUNDAEC did around these capabilities and around sort of this question of what is it that people need to know in terms of both knowledge, in terms about skills, in terms of attitudes and qualities that they need to actually be able to participate in the development of their communities, was written down into workbooks, into textbooks, which, as I mentioned, was part of the sort of systematization of the experience. So those materials then were there was a system that was set up for studying those materials with youth in the community. And originally, really, it was very much, as I was describing with the PSA program, it was non-degree conferring. But what very quickly ended up happening was that in Colombia, at that time, which was basically in the early 80s, there was no secondary education for rural areas in Colombia. There was sort of a universal primary education system, which the government provided, but there wasn't a secondary education system. And basically what would happen was that youth would have to leave their rural communities to go to a nearby town to be able to access education. This was, of course, made the gender gap very large because families were more reticent to send their sort of daughters to get a secondary education because they had to leave the homes and to send sort of the boys. And in general, also, it was aggravated sort of this rural to urban migration with people leaving for rural areas and not coming back. And also that the curriculum that they studied for secondary education at that time in these towns was not really applicable to their local realities. So this curriculum that had been developed, or these materials that had been developed, were actually accredited by the Ministry of Education of Colombia as being equivalent to the high school diploma. And so students who went through the program, and then it led to sort of a whole other area of accrediting the teachers and all of that, would receive the Colombian high school diploma. So it was an official sort of program of the government. And then the teachers in this program became part of the public school system as well. So this was the beginning really of the work of FUNDAEC. And then in this process, over 300,000 students in Colombia went through at least one of the levels of the program. And the program was taken to many other countries in Latin America as well. I'm sorry. And really the program sort of grew, but at the same time also there were some limitations, or there's some constraints with working within a national formal education structure. So what was seen is that, like, while that's a program that needs to continue and that has its own life, there's also the possibilities of working in non-formal education or non-degree conferring education, rather, to sort of have the same result in terms of the purpose of enabling people to participate in their own development. So that's where the PSA program is born, which is sort of it uses the curriculum of the first 2 years or the first level of the SAT program. So that's just a very short answer, condensed. So after 50 years, what difficulties do you still face
Thank
working
you.
at the grassroots level? So I think that's a very good question. I think that part of the questions that we have is, you know, I think what one of the I think premises in a way that FUNDAEC has had is that FUNDAEC has never tried to be extremely large, like as an organization. I think that what FUNDAEC has tried to do is to work with a lot of other organizations and build a lot of relationships and work in a network with others, and sort of allow that process to happen and in different contexts. So not trying to sort of be present in all these different spaces, because otherwise we would lose sort of that connection or that ability to sort of be at the grassroots. But one thing that we've seen, for example, which has been very interesting with this PSA program, is that, for example, we began with this program roughly 17 years ago in Colombia. And when FUNDAEC began the program, we began to implement it ourselves. So everyone was sort of hired by FUNDAEC, and FUNDAEC was running everything. And that continues to be the case in parts of the country. But in one region of the country, where was the region where the program actually begun, what we have seen is that we've actually helped now in the creation of another NGO, of a sort of more grassroots NGO in a way, which is now managing the program in this one region of the country. And so the idea then is that we sort of become advisors to this organization, to this other NGO, but they actually now can do their own things. And this program can be one of their programs, but they can also have other programs they can begin to see, and they can become an actor in their own local reality as well. So in a way, we aren't trying to continue to sort of be present in all spaces, but then actually also allow for institutional development of new organizations as well. And then our role sort of changes as well. That, of course, isn't the case everywhere, but that's sort of like the case in the first region where we began to work, where time has advanced to a certain point that they now have the administrative sort of structure and abilities and individuals who have been educated, have gone through university, who now can actually open their own organization. Sure.
Thank you.
So with Nicolas also has a question, and I can share the contact with him.
Yes, we have a lot of people that in the group that are working right now, for example, on mental health around like youth. Actually, in Colombia, both of them, I think. Do you have also some programs that are going maybe in this direction also, and how the latest crisis of these past years, from COVID to various other like crises that are happening in the all LATAM, but in the world as well, have also impacted maybe your programs, or if you have like started to think about some specific other programs?
So we don't have any programs specifically sort of designed towards mental health. But one thing that's interesting, I think, that happened during the pandemic, which we saw, was that, of course, everything had to somehow stop during the pandemic, right? In terms of like, especially with education and for people to see each other and to meet and everything. So at that time, what FUNDAEC decided was actually to switch in a way to accept that, like, the groups weren't able to to continue studying, they weren't going to be able to meet, etc. But for example, they could actually turn to agriculture. And because the question also at that moment, one of the biggest questions that was present, especially in Colombia during COVID, was food security, because people also didn't have a social safety net to have incomes which could support sort of the families during this time. So there was this big sort of a concern at the time around food security. So what we decided to do was to somehow allow the groups to pivot and to focus their energies on planting sort of small gardens, on making sure that their families had enough food, that the teachers had enough food. And so actually this project of the planting of the trees was born during this time or after this time. And during COVID, what we ended up having was actually thousands and thousands of even virtual trainings for people establishing small gardens in their homes. Some of them in rural areas and actually in urban areas as well. So I think during the time we had over 1,000 families who were involved, who ended up establishing their own family gardens and things like that. And so it was a time, in a way, the system was used, or like the structure that we had was used to allow people to actually continue to be connected, but with another activity. And I think what we saw in terms of mental health, I'm sorry, I'm going around in the question, but in terms of mental health, what we saw with this was that actually the fact that people were engaged in something, even though maybe they weren't like seeing each other as much, or they were only confined with their own families, but the fact that they were engaged in something, the fact that they felt that they were actually doing something, that they were being able to take action sort of towards resolving their own issues, like helped us a lot. Of course, when students were able to return, and there was a lot of issues that had to be resolved, but I think we were able to come back rather quickly, because somehow people were not disconnected during that time. So they weren't connected in the same way. They weren't sort of like told, okay, you have to continue in the normal system, or you have to study in the same way, but they were connected through this action. And that really helped both at the level of their own individual mental health, but also then in their ability to sort of return.
Yeah. And it shows once again, like really how it is, like your method is so linked to indeed like this livelihoods, like really where the needs of the participants. I see some other questions, maybe. Anyone who feel like just unmute yourself and feel free to ask your questions. I see Riaz, you're back today.
It's really exciting to see Bita, because I know her since she was 12, which shows how old I am.
Yes, I heard exactly that you were like connected.
Yes, it's true. Hi, Riaz.
Hi there, Bita. How are you?
Good.
Great presentation.
If you feel more confident about asking your questions in Spanish or Portuguese, feel free to also, of course, ask them in your language. No more questions?
Hi, thank you. I have a very bad internet connection here, but I hope to be here. I don't know if I'm here.
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, no, I was delighted with the presentation of Vita. For me, as a Chilean brother, Latin American brother, well, no, I found pretty interesting I would really appreciate contact with una forma de comunicarse con ella, con Vita.
Can we share your contact, Bita, if that's okay
Yes.
with you?
Yes, no problem. I won't unfortunately be able to participate in the sort of mentoring
Thank you. Thank you so much.
program
Thank you.
that you have because as I was sharing, we have at the beginning, this is our 50th year anniversary, so we have a lot of different activities that are taking place. So unfortunately, I won't be able to participate formally in this mentoring sort of additional space that you have. But yes, feel free to share my contact, and I will try to answer.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
It's not philosophical or anything. I just wanted to know how many students are in the PSA in Colombia right now?
Right now, currently, there's over 1,500, I think, who graduated, and I think maybe 1,200 like current students at the different levels of the program. This is still counting the students that are now part of this new organization that has been formed.
Okay. And does that count the students in the schools?
No, this is just PSA.
Okay, thanks.
And the PSA was created again, when was it created?
2006, roughly.
Okay.
We began with the first groups, yeah. And it was, as I was saying, it's basically a derivative of the SAT program. So it's like the first, use the curriculum of the first 2 years, yeah.
Great. Great. Unless there's no other questions, so for the sake of time, I would maybe close this round of questions. But as we were saying, we will share all the presentations. We will share also the contacts of Bita. Thank you so much, Bita, for being here and presenting FUNDAEC. It has been a pleasure for us after studying FUNDAEC, and Peter was studying it for so many years. It was great that we could have you today to present it. And for everybody else, we are going to be sending out our emails to confirm the cohort for the next steps for the mentoring that is going to start next week. On the 24th of October, we're going to launch the session all together. We're just confirming the final things with the mentors. So we're going to propose you a mentoring slot because it's a lot of coordination, just like so that you have all of the information at once you can plan your time. Yeah, so if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm just opening the chat to see. So there's like a lot of comments exactly on how inspiring the work was and how the presentation was amazing, Bita.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
To Maria and everyone at the team who made this possible, and thank you for the invitation. And it's been wonderful to share our experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will share more resources with all of you around all of these things that we have been seeing in these 2 days. And be in touch, everyone. Thank you again, Bita. And I will close this session for today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.